Hello, welcome back to Crops TV. I'm Alejandro Plastina. I'm an associate professor of economics at Iowa State, and today I'm going to be discussing the economics of soil health. I want to acknowledge the work that we did with my colleagues through an Iowa Nutrient Research Grant in 2018, 2019, and 2020, and Practical Farmers of Iowa and a number of colleagues from Iowa State were involved, and also the Iowa chapter of the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers. So with that, let's think a little bit about soil health. How is soil health defined? Well, it's defined as the continued capacity of soils to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. So in a sense, it's similar to human health in several aspects. And the way soil health is reflected in the productivity of the soil is by regulating water, sustaining plant and animal life, filtering and buffering potential pollutants, cycling nutrients, and providing physical stability and support to crop production and animal production. And the way that NRCS recommends that soils be managed is by minimizing disturbance, maximizing biodiversity, maximizing soil cover, and maximizing living roots. Those are the principles of soil health. And how to implement those? Well, usually by providing soil armor, by minimizing the disturbance, providing plant diversity, continual live root and plant in the system, and integrating livestock are ways to do that. Now, at the bottom of this slide, there are a number of practices associated with each of those principles of soil health. And as you can see, cover crops appear several times in this slide, just like reduced tillage or residue management. So those practices like no-till, reduced till, conservation till, and cover crops are at the forefront of soil health management. Well, we've seen the increase in adoption of both practices, cover crops and no-till, all throughout the nation. But it would be wrong to assume that increase in adoption has been constant or homogeneous across the country. These two maps show different colors highlighting the rate of adoption or disadoption between the two censuses of agriculture, 2012 and 2017. And what we can see on the left is that all those red areas actually indicate that the counties where cover crop adoption declined between 2012 and 2017. And on the right, the red areas indicate the counties where no-till area declined between 2012 and 2017. So it's important to highlight that although overall both no-till and cover crops are becoming more common across the nation, not every county in the nation is increasing the adoption homogeneously. And the reason behind that, there are multiple reasons, societal reasons, but I will focus on the economic reasons. We conducted several studies in the state of Iowa and in the Midwest with different groups, different teams, and from 2017 to more recent 2019 and even 2020. And in all cases, on average, the net returns to cover crops in particular are negative when we incorporate the value of yield change, the cost of planting cover crops, the seed, the machinery, etc., and the extra termination cost. And we exclude cost share payments and the reduced costs from grazing livestock on the biomass of the cover crops. So there's a an economic reason why cover crop adoption has been limited across the nation, but particularly in Iowa, despite several incentives, several economic incentives like cost share. So, because even if we look at the net returns after accounting for cost share, only one of the studies actually show a positive net return, and it becomes more likely that cover crops will be profitable when cost share and grazing of livestock occurs simultaneously for one parcel of land. So, as I said, these incentives to adopt cover crops occur even in the presence of big cost share payments. And this slide shows a number of cost share payments for different states in the nation. The main criticism to these economic results is that we are failing to account for the long-term soil organic matter that tends to grow, tends to improve with the use of cover crops, and the long-term effects in soil health overall, water quality, and the land value. So let's analyze each of those one at a time. Soil health is a private benefit to the farmer, and a healthier soil should result in higher yields and less soil erosion. But those factors are all accounted for in our economic studies. So that link is a weak criticism, I would say. Now, water quality, that is not accounted for in our analysis, and it's a great societal benefit. But the fact that these water quality benefits are not included in the analysis is due to the fact that water quality does not affect the profitability of the farmer. So there are no fines to polluters, and there are no extra incentives right now to produce a water quality improvement unless you participate in a specific environmental system program. So water quality, unless there are changes in the way environmental programs pay for environmental services, water quality right now should not be included in the private analysis of net returns to cover crops. And finally, what's the link between conservation practices and the land values? Well, that is a very important link in my perspective. So that's why we developed a project to analyze that. So with colleagues that I mentioned at the beginning, we submitted a grant proposal to INRC with the goal to evaluate whether and how rural appraisers incorporate fertility and soil health results into their appraisal reports. So why are we focusing on rural appraisers? Well, because if there's an effect on the profitability of a farm via soil health that is not accounted for yields in the long term, then it has to be accounted for by the value of the land. That parcel of land should be more valuable if the farmland is more productive, healthier. So the question was, okay, who are going to know about land valuation and who play a critical role in determining farmland values? Well, the answer clearly is rural appraisers, because they come up with values that serve as an anchor to the negotiation between the buyer and the seller when there's any land transaction. And our hypothesis was that if a farm is in long-term conservation practices, so they practice conservation in the long term, that should result in higher soil fertility and soil health metrics, and that should be captured by the appraisers in their valuation or appraisal methodology, and therefore result in higher land values. Now, the challenge that we faced when developing this project or this idea was to engage appraisers but avoid strategic behavior, such as depending on the appraiser's perception of conservation practices, they might be artificially inflating the value of farmland in long-term cover crops or conservation practices to bring the average value up in our study. Or if the appraiser is a no-till detractor, for example, they might artificially penalize farmland in our analysis to bring the average value down in our study. So in order to avoid that kind of strategic behavior by the appraisers, we decided to use misleading information. And this is all human resources board approved. We provided fake soil fertility and soil health test results to the appraisers for 3 different farms in our study. We concealed the true goal of our study, and we told the appraisers that we were trying to test 2 types of training on soil health and see how they perceived those trainings and whether those trainings made any difference at the time of appraising land. We had 3 groups of appraisers. The blue team had no training at all, so that was our control group. The gold team, we provided 1-hour training, and a red team that we provided 3 hours training for. And the training depended. The short training, the 1-hour training, was mostly on soil fertility tests. The 3-hour training included both soil fertility tests and soil health metrics. So the way the experiment was set up was we hired 9 certified rural appraisers to appraise 3 farms in Washington County, which is the top county in percent of acres in cover crops, and it has almost 12% of its acres in cover crops, and it's the 21st in the state in terms of no-till. It has about 46% of its area in under no-till practices. So we had 3 different farms. One farm has been under no-till for many years, but it had never used cover crops. The second farm was under long-term no-till and cover crops, so both practices. And the third farm was long-term conventional tillage and no cover crops, basically. Now, the appraisers were asked to appraise these 3 farms, all of them, and they were given fake soil test results, and they didn't know exactly, or at least we did not provide information on the long-term practices in each of those farms. We just provided all the required information to run the appraisal analysis and these soil test results. So our hypothesis was that better fertility and soil health tests, test results, although they were fake, would lead to higher land values in the appraisal reports. Of course, we manipulated those fertility tests to actually have some correlation between the expected fertility and soil health metrics and the true long-term conservation practices in those farms. So we had the three groups. This is a slide trying to summarize how each of the groups was treated. We had three appraisers in each group. All of them, of course, signed appraisal authorization contracts. They were all provided aerial pictures of the farms. They all received information release requests for the Farm Service Agency office signed by the landowner to run the to conduct the appraisal analysis. They all received fake soil fertility test results. Only one group, the red group, received also fake soil health test results. So a more detailed analysis of soil health metrics. And they were all paid $1,000 per appraisal. And we provided, along with Practical Farmers of Iowa, training on soil fertility for the gold and red teams, but only training. In addition to that, we provided soil health training for the red team. So the red team received 3 continued education credits from the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers for going through this 3-hour training. And in our instructions to each of the teams, we told the red team to use, we encouraged them to use soil health data. We encouraged the gold team to use soil fertility data, and we didn't mention the requirement or the encouragement to use any kind of soil fertility information or anything else for the blue team. This is how the soil tests would look like. There were several samples per farm, and they correlated to some degree with the expected, not the real, but the expected soil metrics and soil fertility test results of a farm in each of the 3 categories: long-term no-till, long-term no-till and cover crops, and long-term conventional practices. So to provide a simplified project timeline, we received all the appraisal reports by June 2019. That was the first round of appraisal reports, and all appraisals were conducted with an effective appraisal date of April 1st, 2019. So they were all backdated to that specific date, so they were all comparable. Then in October 2019, we trained our gold and red groups or teams, and by July 2020, we received all the appraisal reports of the second round of the same 9 appraisers for the same 3 farms, but the only difference between the previous one and the July 2020 round is that some appraisers have gone through our training in October 2019. And all these appraisal reports had the same effective appraisal date of April 1st, 2020. And by the end of the project, we debriefed all appraisers on how we misled them in terms of concealing some information and sharing fake soil tests and results. So we had a total of 54 appraisal reports. So 9 appraisers times 3 farms, 2 times. The appraisal methods followed by the appraisers by their own choosing, because they need to follow certain rules to maintain their certification. And that was something that our team did not mess with. We did not ask them to follow any particular method. We just asked them to conduct their appraisal analysis as usual. And they all included a sales comparison method, an income approach to value method, and a cost approach to value. Those are 3 ways to look at the same property, the same farmland, and at the end, the appraiser makes a final decision on what the appraised value is based on his or her own judgment, and it can be different from the 3 previous numbers. So in this slide, I'm showing the appraised values for 2019 and 2020 for Farm 1, and this is the farm in long-term no tillage. This farm is almost 105 acres and in size, and it has a CSR2 value, a corn suitability rating version 2 of 87.2. So it has a high productivity index associated with it, an average productivity index, which is pretty high. And the overall value across the 9 appraisers was $10,032 in 2019 and $10,510 in 2020. And of course, there's some variability across groups and even within groups, even within teams, right? And when we conducted analysis to evaluate whether there was any statistically significant difference across teams for a particular year, which is the second group of results on this table, around the middle of the table, those differences were not statistically different. And when we analyzed the differences across years for each of the teams and then for the overall results, yes, in general, the valuation in 2020 was higher than in 2019 and statistically significant only for the overall. So the overall average in 2020 was about $478 higher than in 2019 at 10% level of confidence. So that's for Farm 1. And remember, this farm was valued at about $10,500, right? The second farm, the next slide, is the farm in long-term no-till and cover crops. This is a slightly smaller farm, 73 acres, with a CSR2 of 58 on average, so lower productivity than the Farm 1. So the appraised values are lower than the appraised values for Farm 1. In this case, they range between they averaged $6,628 in 2019 and $6,668 in 2020. When we look at the differences across teams, the red team actually assigned on average a lower appraised value than the blue team and the gold team in 2019. That's where you see the asterisks in the middle of the table, but that did not happen again in 2020. And when we evaluate the changes from year to year by team or for the overall analysis, those differences in appraised value are not statistically significant, and even they are small in levels, right, in dollars per acre. So our third farm is a long-term conventional practices farm, and in this case it has an area of 66 acres with a CSR2 value of 57.3, which makes this farm similar to Farm 2, but Farm 2 and 3 are different in terms of area and productivity than Farm 1. In this case, the overall average appraised value in 2019 was $6,894, and for 2020 it was $7,038. And there are no statistical differences across groups for any of the years or even across years for Farm 3. So we can say that values were similar in both years, 2019 and 2020. Now, when comparing the appraised values by pairs of farms, all those most comparisons show that Farm 1 is more valuable than Farm 2 and 3 because of the characteristics I mentioned. A larger farm with a higher productivity index, right? And when we compare the mean percent differences in appraised value between 2019 and 2020, there was the percentages, the increase in valuation for Farm 1 overall was larger than the percent increase in valuation for Farm 2 and Farm 3. But the percent increase in valuation for Farm 2 and 3 were not statistically different, very similar. So what we learned from this analysis, it's not just how appraisers conduct their analysis, which was interesting per se, but we received feedback throughout the meetings that we conducted that was quite insightful. So during the training, and these were only 2 teams participating in the training, we collected these quotes. So they thought that the information was useful, soil health metrics and soil fertility tests. That kind of information was useful, but they weren't sure how collected information at the farm level could be used in appraisal analysis. And the main issue is that appraisers usually use information from one farm and compare that information against similar information from other farms, from other similar farms, and there are no even if they had information about a particular farm, they lack the information on other comparable sales from other farms that sold recently. So that's a major challenge, a major barrier to using this kind of soil health metrics on land valuation. More comments from the blue team, and this team was not asked to use soil test results and they were not trained. Only one of the 3 appraisers mentioned soil fertility in the report, and but none of them actually adjusted the appraised values to reflect differences in soil fertility. The gold team was encouraged to use test results, and they received training in October 2019. And in the report of April 2019, 2 of them mentioned soil tests. So, different comments, but none of them used those tests to adjust appraised values. Now, in the 2020 appraisal reports for this same team, all 3 of them mentioned soil tests, but I want to share some of the insightful comments they included in the appraisal report. So the first comment is about the lack of similar soil information available for the sale farms that serve as a comparison for the appraisal report. The second comment said something along the lines of, this appraiser is not aware of where these soil samples were taken on this farm, so they were concerned about these 5 soil samples and how representative those soil samples were of the entire farm. And the third one indicated an evaluation of the level of organic matter. And even though this person considered that information useful for the farm, that information could not be used in the appraisal report because of the lack of benchmarks, basically. So none of them, in the end, used those test results to adjust the appraised values. Finally, the red team, in the first round of appraisal reports, only one of the three appraisers mentioned soil tests, and they were encouraged to use test results from the beginning, and they received a 3-hour training in October 19. Well, only one of them mentioned soil tests, and this person considered that there was no need to reconsider soil quality or farming efficiency in the selection of the capitalization rate to calculate the value of the farmland, because the rental rates and sale prices are inputs to the capitalization rates. So they are, the information is indirectly, the information about soil quality and farming efficiency is indirectly captured by rental rates in the area and sale prices of comparable farmland. So none of them used the test results to adjust appraised values. And during the second round of appraisal reports in 2020, all of the three appraisers mentioned the test results, but they complained not having similar information for the comparable farms. So the benchmarks they used to assign the value to any particular property. So they, in the end, they did not use the information on soil health or soil fertility to adjust the appraised value. I like to highlight the last comment. It's almost impossible to translate the value of soil health on the comparables to value of the subject property. Those were, direct comments from the appraisers in the appraisal report, which is a document, right? A legal document. So what we concluded is that even though soil health is a major aspect of current discussions about conservation practices and farming practices in general, and that previous economic analysis of cover crop adoption or no-tillage adoption exclude the variable soil health or the long-term impacts of maintained adoption or use of these conservation practices on the value of farmland. In reality, rural appraisers are following strict rules to appraise farmland, and they base their analysis on comparable sales, income approach to value, and cost approach to value. And if they deviate from the rules, they risk losing their certification. Currently, land is traded on CSR2, which is an index of potential productivity in each farm, which was developed not to track productivity per se, but for tax purposes. So there's this joint link there between the goal of the CSR2 index and what it's being used for. And current practices do not allow for major adjustments based on soil health or soil fertility. And that, per se, is a major barrier to monetizing soil health. So in order to reduce or remove this barrier, we would need to see a database developed with soil health and fertility test metrics for comparables that can be used by appraisers when analyzing the properties of one farm versus others. And also it would would really help conducting an education program on these metrics, soil health metrics and fertility tests, for rural appraisers, and discuss in more detail how CSR2 reflects or not soil resiliency, and how that can be captured in the appraisal process. So, in particular, for researchers and extension specialists, there's a role to play in learning more about long-term conservation practices and those soil health metrics and fertility test results for different CSR2 levels, and in particular whether the CSR2 could be adjusted eventually to reflect changes in management that improve soil health and fertility. Currently, that's not possible. So maybe if the CSR2 or another index, productivity index, could reflect the impact of conservation practices on soil productivity, on soil health, on soil fertility, that could reduce these barriers to monetizing soil health. So with that, I will conclude my presentation, and I appreciate your time. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments. There's my contact information in this slide. And please stay tuned for the next episode of Crop TV.